going to start in like 2 minutes, so you're going to do the intro. She's just going to tell us when my mic's ready. I'm all set? I'm all set.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Do you need a microphone? Okay.
Just bend over. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Welcome, everybody. My name's Jason Prokofiew, and I am the president of MSL's Diversity Alliance. And the Diversity Alliance strives to meet the needs of the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender students and their allies at MSL. We're also proud to be the first law school organization in Massachusetts to offer this sort of seminar, and for free, and to be recognized through a citation by Governor Deval Patrick for our commitment to raising awareness of and preventing bullying in the Commonwealth. The LGBT community has a great deal to gain from the Massachusetts anti-bullying law, but one reason that I feel comfortable acting as Diversity Alliance president and supporting this seminar is that the Diversity Alliance strives to look beyond the LGBT community and ask who else can we stand with and, if necessary, up for. Our program presenters today, Paula Caldas, Paula Colby-Clements, and Dean Graziano, ask us to look at bullying of anybody as problematic, and that is the sort of wide gaze that the Diversity Alliance will always support. 16 years ago, when I was a sophomore at Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School, my friend Ellie came out as bisexual to a student body that didn't even say the word gay or bisexual if it didn't say it with disgust. On the day she came out, she shook our school and our community. On that day, Ellie was cornered by our peers in the hallway, and they threw books, pens, pencils, notebooks, rocks, and food at her. They chased her out of the school. Slowly, Ellie and we, her friends, decided that we were not happy to be bullied out of our school. We found our allies quietly in the faculty who had the LGBT safe zone stickers on their office doors. If I were 16 today, I might go up to those same teachers and the teachers who didn't necessarily support us and let them know of our desire not to be stoned or otherwise bullied and say, hey, there's this new law and I want to be safe here. How does it work? How are you going to make it work? It's my hope that we'll all walk away today with a better sense of what this law can do to help us recognize that the gay kid, the shy nerd, the tomboy, the kid wearing hand-me-downs, the young woman in the wheelchair, the heavy kid, and the only child of color in the class is quite aware of how he or she is different, doesn't need to be bullied about it, and is entitled to some peace at school. I'm proud to introduce our team of presenters today. My Vice President of the Diversity Alliance, Dean Graziano, an educator with 23 years of experience, who with great enthusiasm brought this project to the Diversity Alliance, to MSL, and to us here today. Attorney Paula Colby-Clements, a member of the Andover School Committee, a graduate of MSL, and our Director of Admissions. And Attorney Paula Caldas, who is Assistant Dean here at MSL, a professor. She is a Diversity Alliance advisor, my friend and dance partner, and a child welfare and family law advocate.
Sure. So since I'm a professor of law and we teach Socratically, I'm used to walking, and so I'm going to try not to make you dizzy, but I can't just sit at a microphone, so I'm going to stand up. It's our intention this morning to keep this sort of casual and open so that hopefully you'll have some new understanding of the law that you don't already have. We also have decided that we put a lot of information onto the slides that are going to be put up here today. And we have no intention of actually reading from those slides. We intend for those slides to be a resource for you to take home. So we sort of created notes for you in advance. And we're going to point out some things that might not be written there. So use those as a resource more than worrying about reading through what's on them as we speak. Was there anything else you wanted to add? No, okay. So the other thing I'd like to say is we're working under the assumption, since you all work for the schools, you're obviously well aware of this legislation that impacts your districts, and that you've all got copies of the actual statutes. So we didn't provide those in your packet, though we had some discussion about whether we should or we shouldn't. If anybody is having trouble getting the full text of the statute, you have our cards. Email us. We'll make sure that you get it. We'll send it to you in electronic format, but that is not in there. I am going to start with sort of the overview of the statute and highlight some things that when you read it, you as non-lawyers may not have thought of. So initially, you know, why did this even happen? And I like to start there only because when the legislature acts, sometimes they act in what they think is the best interest of the public, but they act so quickly, and I know there's a lot of discussion around how the legislature never acts quickly, but in fact sometimes they act very quickly and sometimes they act almost too quickly before they can vet out the sort of practical implications of passing a new law. And in this particular case, most folks may know, but if they don't, Chad Walker Hoover and Phoebe Prince were sort of the two back-to-back cases where they were kids that committed suicide as a result of being bullied. And in what I always kind of categorize as a knee-jerk reaction by the legislature, they immediately managed to push this legislation through, and we're all left sort of dealing with it, even though there are parts of this legislation that are, in my opinion, very ambiguous, and we're left to try to figure out how do we deal with it. So in starting with just sort of the statutory overview, the big sections are the 37O and 37H. And so what do they do? If you read it, you can probably figure it out. I'll highlight a couple things from it. 37O is the outline of the school bullying and the bullying prevention. And so what's in there are the actual definitions of bullying. So districts will struggle with trying to develop definitions. It's actually in the statute. Here's what bullying is. We'll get to whether it's a good definition or not in a few minutes, but it's actually in there. Also in the 37O section is the plans. It tells you exactly what your plans must include. So you're all, I know, acutely aware of the deadline that's facing you and looming in front of you for December 31st. They do at least give you some guidance in terms of what needs to be in the plans. I think it's the implementation portion that's going to be harder, and the sort of evolution and maybe changing those plans as time goes forward after you even submit them. The other thing that it does is it mandates training. So as the slide says, you know, this statute, we've always dealt with bullying in our schools before. We've always dealt with safety issues in our school. With the passing of the statute by the legislature, the stakes have just been raised enormously high for all districts, for all schools. Because what it does is it really places, by statute, an even higher duty than you ever had before to prevent this type of thing from happening. And so in addition to it mandating the plan, it mandates training. And it mandates training of your teachers. It mandates training for your students, because your students may not necessarily be aware of what bullying is. I mean, they have some idea, but they might still struggle with what behavior is acceptable or not. And it mandates training not just of teachers and administrators, but basically all employees. So if you read the statute, you know, you're dealing with the bus driver, the cafeteria worker. I mean, anybody that's in your schools and interacting in some official capacity with the kids are supposed to be involved in some form of training. 37H is the section of the statute that deals with the actual policies relative to the conduct of the teachers and students, and in particular the student handbooks. And so what 37H does is It dictates what the superintendents need to do with respect to policies. It gives guidance and dictates the duties and responsibilities of the principals. And it actually does provide specific provisions that must go into the student handbooks. And so if you look at 37H, it will actually give specific language that has to be included in your handbook. So you're definitely going to want to have copies of the statutes if you don't already. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, rather than kind of running through and reading the statute, because you can do that yourself, is when a lawyer reads things, we don't automatically attribute the definitions to terms as they're used in the common vernacular. We constantly wonder, wait a minute, how are those terms going to be legally defined? And so there's a couple things that you have to understand the impact of raising the stakes. Before I get to the definition of bullying, one thing that you're going to have to remember is that as administrators, I'm sure you've always been acutely aware of trying to monitor things that happen within your building. Section 37O actually has a provision, and that provision I will read, stating that bullying shall be prohibited in addition to all the places that you would assume it would be prohibited, but it also says at a location, activity, function, or program that is not school-related if the bullying creates a hostile environment at school for the victim. And so going back to that idea that we need to train and we need to train students, what you need to remember now is the statute has reached out beyond your building. And that doesn't mean, oh my God, so what am I supposed to now it's my job to monitor what the kids do at home, or if they're not at a school function even after school, what's happening? Well, yes and no, because the statute implicates not only electronic forms of communication, but verbal expression and physical expression. If what's happening at home, if they're harassing each other on Facebook or texting, and that then comes back into school the next day and creates that hostile environment, what the kids are going to need to understand is the statutes are going to allow you to reach out, or God forbid if they get themselves involved in what is now defined as a crime, or there's anti-harassment orders issued, all of that stuff is going to be able to be brought back in and used against them. So they need to be acutely aware that this happens, and that now we're not only worried about how they act in school, but how their behavior outside of school impacts how they react or interact with each other when they come back in. And so you want to be thinking about that in your training. The other thing that you want to look at is the definition of bullying. So here is where I see some of the problems with this particular statute. If you look again at 37O, it gives you a definition of bullying. And here's when we read the statute that we see things that are problematic. When it gives the definition of bullying, it says, and I'm just going to read parts of this, that it's acts that cause physical or emotional harm to the victim or damage to the victim's property. Physical or emotional harm to the victim. Creates a hostile environment. Places a victim in reasonable fear of harm. If I stopped right here and went around the room and asked people what that meant, it would take us a long time to build consensus as to what that means. So how the heck are you supposed to develop plans to deal with this definition if we could probably debate all day what it means? So what we as lawyers do is we look to other areas of the law to start thinking about how this is going to be interpreted. And I would suggest that for this, we would look at areas of tort law. And in tort law, we sometimes apply, when we're dealing with things like negligence or other areas, an objective-subjective standard. I'll just highlight that even things like when the Supreme Court ruled on pornography, one of the justices said, well, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I know it when I see it. And that is a good example of what we would call the objective part of the objective-subjective standard. And so when you're developing your plan, start with the easy part, the objective part. We know the big things that are causing people emotional harm. We know the things that are scaring people. We know the things that might cause fear. Those are the obvious things that I'm not going to run through, but we're not going to allow students to hit each other. There's certain terminology that we know is going to harm students. But the scary part about this, in my opinion, is that when you talk about places of victim and fear, that becomes the subjective part, right? So if somebody calls me a name, and I say, okay, so I'm walking into school and I'm in high school, and every day the same kid tells me they don't like my clothes. I might be like, I don't care what you think, and I go off to class. Someone does that to Paula, maybe Paula now doesn't want to come to school anymore after a week of that. So now you're struggling as a district with, really, so how do I deal with this? That's the subjective piece that we have to sort of get our arms around and figure out, how do we adapt policies to make sure we're doing the best we can to protect our kids. I don't have a lot of time, but I do want to point out one more thing, is that with respect to that, there's what I call the common sense provision of 37.0, which is embedded in small language in subsection D. And I will pull that specific language out. It does say that a school may establish separate discrimination or harassment policies that include categories of students. And to me, that is immensely important language, because for me, that sentence helps to reconcile this subjective portion of the statute. It doesn't answer all the questions for us, but what do I mean? Okay, so here's an example. First of all, 4 big things. When you have your policies and then your procedures, say your disciplinary procedures, you can definitely have varying policies for things that would be viewed as civil rights violations and things of that nature. So let's just say that normally swearing in the hallways is a detention. Well, maybe, so that's a verbal form of expression. Well, if that verbal form of expression is some type of discriminatory thing, like calling somebody gay, maybe that has a higher penalty, and people should know about that. You can do that. You can set categories and have varying forms of categories. The other thing is, don't think that when you write your policies that you need, okay, if somebody harasses someone for being gay, this is just the example I'm using, then there shall be a detention. So when you think of the practical aspect of that, right, does that mean that if a 5th grader who's heard this term is in the playground and says, oh, you're gay, we have to give the 5th grader a detention? Do we see a difference when the 5th grader says it and the high school student says it? I do, right? Because the high school student should probably know what that is. So if the high school student's going around and really taunting someone and saying, you're gay, you're a loser, we can impute some level of knowledge to those words to that person who's doing that. If the 5th grader here says that term and says, oh, I don't like you, you're gay, and walks away in the playground, that kid might not even know what he or she is saying, right? So you can set up classifications for your levels of education in your system so that we can use it as a mechanism to teach kids and not immediately punish the 5th grader for something they said, which might be punishable for something that the high school student said. So again, I would recommend that you look very closely at this, because I call it the common sense aspect of the statute, and I do think it helps to reconcile the two parts of the statute. And so I'm going to have to kind of run through this very quickly because my time is almost up, probably past. But when you're looking at the policies in your plan, these are some of the things on this slide: collecting evidence, making sure you interview well, getting witnesses' statements right away, that are all going to be critical in terms of enforcing your policy, because evidence gets stale immediately. So the more time you wait to write things up, you can go to the next slide, the better. We talked about the impact of the law and the ambiguity. Professor Caldas will talk about the interplay of the juvenile system. You can go to the next slide. And so, we talked a little bit about the knee-jerk reaction of the law, but just because the legislature might have reacted quickly doesn't mean we didn't need it. 7 million incidents of bullying occur in U.S. schools every single year. It's clearly a big problem that we face, and it needs to be addressed. It affects at least 1 in 3 public school children, and certainly for the gay, lesbian, transgender community, those statistics get even higher, and I won't run through all of them now. So those are the pieces in the law that I think that we need to highlight and be thinking about in terms of the ambiguity, and where there is some areas that allow us to deal with that ambiguity. And I'm going to move on and let Dean talk about some of the other pieces. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Dean, and everyone thinks it's Dean of a school, and it's kind of nice because I'm sitting between two professors, but someone has already asked, are you a dean? That's my first name, and I'd like to preface with that. The second is that it's a unanimous decision. I'm going to sit down because if I get up, I will go well over the time limit. I will be up and about during.
Over it sitting down as well.
So when I get to the NIAS piece, I will be up and lively, and hopefully that can bring some light to a very dry topic. I'd like to begin with the real central piece of why this law came about, and that is the victim itself. And the Massachusetts bullying law actually defines a victim as a student against whom bullying or retaliation has been perpetrated. I guess a lot of you or all of you should have gotten out by August 31st the model plan, the model intervention and prevention plan. And in that, it doesn't mean that you follow it or have to follow it word for word. There's a lot of pieces missing, as Professor Colby Clements has mentioned. And one of those are, or some of those are, specifically the types of bullying. You've heard of cyberbullying. That's a type, and now it's defined. We're one of the few states that actually put that in immediately to have cyberbullying. But there's also other areas of victims that need to be addressed. And in your plans, you can introduce racial, sexual orientation, physical disabilities, intellectual development. If they're spelled out, it can be nothing more than this list includes but is not limited to. What will that do for your students? We're talking about the safety of those victims, or really having them feel in a safer environment. The list is there. Parents and guardians can review it, as well as the students. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's certainly something that it says, we're addressing it, we're hearing your concerns. A very important piece. The next slide, thanks, Rashida, actually talks about a culture. And as you read through there, and there's a lot there, I think the most important thing is creating a culture. Again, as it was alluded, if you hear names in the hallway, I know it's very hard. I was on the teacher side, and I'm sitting down in front of some teachers and administrators. Having teachers in front of their doors, hearing the kinds of things that happen in the hallway, hey, you gay, or this is gay, it almost has become matter-of-factly. Before it used to be, oh, that's lame. Now it's that's gay. And that's offensive to people. If you get on it and you jump on it and you're consistent and it's, hey, stop that. That's unacceptable. Are you, I don't know, you're in the green shirt over here. If I hear it again, there's a detention or whatever discipline you've decided. If the students start to see the teachers, it swells, doing that consistency, that creates a culture. It's the opposite where you have, can we have our iPods on during midterms? No, there's no electronic policy. Miss Jones allows it, and then you have a divisive situation. So in doing so, if there's a consistent culture, you're embedding it. I had a couple ideas, and I'm trying to go quick. I'll send these out to you in an email. That's why we took your email address. Other things are like high school situations. We have a spirit week. I think a great opportunity is, and I'm not knocking professional shirt day or Hawaiian shirt day, but how about when you're addressing who wins the junior, senior, sophomore, and freshman classes, having who has the best anti-bullying message, who has the best message, and using that day of the 5 for Spirit Week to get your students involved. If that becomes embedded in the culture, it's going to sell. And it becomes where the students are doing it. They're coming up with some really great creative ideas, and they're doing it. And then we get to sit back and say, it's working. I came up with a couple slogans real quick. You don't have to use them, but they're ideas. And these are posters that you can have a poster contest. And these were off the top of my head the night before I had to do my review for classes. Do not do zero, be a hero, and report bullying. Have signs up, keep it clean. Do not say things that you do not mean. Rather than teasing, makes your ex pleasing. The point I'm making is if these signs are up in the classroom, I know at the high school level, when I talk about NIASC, the day before NIASC comes, every school has a brand new mission statement and student learning for expectations in their classroom. And everyone's giggling because they know what I'm talking about. I coach here too, and I've been on many visits. If you create that culture where there can be nothing more, maybe K through 6, of a classroom constitution, you have Constitution Day, September 19th. Some schools do great. Some schools say, I'm just going to mention it. It's federal. We have to do it. If you could do a classroom constitution, we will not allow bullying. It's the 3rd week or sometimes the 4th week of school. How great is that to start embedding that into the culture of your school? The classroom constitution could be laminated, put up on the way out as the students are leaving. Not that that's going to do much, but if it's sold over and over and over again, those are the kinds of things that I think become the culture that you're trying to create in the school to prevent bullying. Rashida? The mass bullying law actually addresses, or you have 3 concerns with victims. And what I mean by that is 3 required codicils of the law. The first one, clear procedures for restoring a sense of safety for the victim. If you've already begun to address that issue, and I think most of you have, I think there's only 12% of the schools in Massachusetts that have submitted their plans already. With that, what could you possibly do? There are incredible statistics out there for what are the victims, what are the target audiences, how many students are, what demographic. Do an anonymous questionnaire in your school. If you really want to find out, it's great to know what the state average is and the national average. What's happening in the doors? When those students come in, what's happening? It's anonymous. You could take a look at, have you ever been bullied? Have you ever seen bullying taking place? Key question. Where do you see bullying take place? Oh, the back hallway, the extra hallway that no one uses. I might want to get a teacher down there. We all have teacher duties, whether it's recess or lunch duty. That gives you a great hand on the pulse of what's going on in your school. It's anonymous. If you put a teacher in an area where they say this is where bullying's happening, the kids are seeing and hearing, they listen to me. And that becomes part of the culture as well, that you're addressing what they perceive as a situation or a problem that's threatening to them. So I think it's a matter of being proactive, and I'm not saying that in front of administrators sometimes where our hands are tied, but having a proactive approach and letting the students have a voice, and that also goes with the teachers. As we have to develop as part of this plan, and not part of my topic, what are the professional development plans that you lay out? I would get bang for the buck. I'm not trying to insult anyone in the room, but I would break it out where there's 3 groups, and I would have the teacher say, what are the top 3 pieces of professional development that we need to get through this? And they might have 20 at you. The top 3 are the most that are seen. I would break the groups up, and then we get our double PDP points for presenting. So that's a situation in which I would try and get bang for the buck and get what the teachers are asking for the professional development to make their jobs easier and to really address these issues. Addressing the gay issue very quickly. You'll hear it in the hallway, you this, you that, the whole 9 yards. Again, it's the culture. If enough teachers start it, it's almost like cancer. It'll grow and it'll surround. And at that point, get over here. If enough teachers start doing that, again, it's the condition that you want. It's the culture that you're achieving. And I'm not going to overdo that. We've already talked about it. But again, it's having your teachers be cognizant of the fact that this is happening. If students start to see the teachers trying to deter that kind of act, I think that will become part of the culture. Quickly, the plan should include the following to protect the victim. I'm not going to presuppose the special ed piece of this. If a student has an IEP and they are prone or are more potential to be a victim of bullying and or have characteristics or traits that they would be more of a bully, the IEP plan has to have strategies to address those issues. And I'm not qualified. I'd ask you to just make a note, be cognizant when you get back to make sure that that's something that you don't oversee or oversight in your plans. Thanks. The next one, the second area is provide procedures for the protection of a reporter from retaliation. A lot of people have suggested a suggestion box. Suggest a suggestion box in the office. Great. Put the target on the back, and they'll be more than happy to come in and drop that in. I made a couple suggestions. One would be the school has several lines, actually have a hotline. A parent or a student or another parent could call in and say, this is what we reported. The other piece is every website, administrators and teachers have their websites. I would have something like an anonymous drop box where no one can access it, but you can only put in. And what's great about that is we talked about evidence. If someone's on YouTube or someone's on Twitter, they can actually say, this is happening to me, and send a link. Now you have evidence. Now you can address it, and it really helps you from scrambling and trying to say what's happening in your investigation. It's immediate, and you're able to look at that. Just a suggestion. Victims of abuse, again, restoring a sense of safety. The one thing I would mention is a master list. I love the teacher contracts, duties as assigned. Master list. If something happens, the last thing you want in a victim situation is I have a rapport going. I might not know Miss Colby Clements. Mrs. Colby Clements. I might just know her as a teacher, or she is mine. The last thing I want to do if that child comes to her and has that bond and they're upset and they're not feeling safe is for her to say, I'd love to talk, but I have a class in 5 minutes. Or follow me to the office and I'll drop you off. There should be a master list, and it's just a suggestion. Again, please don't think I'm trying to do jobs for anybody. I'd have a master list. Graziano, period 3, he's off. Dean, can you get down? We had a situation. Can you cover Miss Caldis's room? If you have a master list, it's a lot easier than when a crisis hits. And having that availability already in front of you allows the most important piece, that victim never feels unsafe once they've confessed or they've come forward with it. So that's just something to think about. Looking out for potential victims and going quicker. Some plans include a safe person. I would also think in the day when I was in 6th grade, we had student patrols, prefix, something like that might work again. If you've got a hallway situation and you have students that might want to apply, what a great thing to have them learn cover skill and interviewing skills, and why do you want to be a patrol and cover the hallways. Now you've offered more eyes and ears into your school, and they're not there to deter a fight or to jump in on it, but they're there to get a teacher right away, because now you have more eyes and ears really out there kind of overviewing the school. And I think that's an important concept. At the high school level, you could have prefix or whatever you want to call them. Again, it would be a process in which the school could go through. You've become recommended by 4 teachers. You apply. There are National Honor Society standards of community service. So what a great opportunity to offer that, and they get it out of the way. Rotate it out so students have that access. Again, just another idea. More eyes and ears can never hurt. The next one, coaching. It wasn't trying to be funny here when I say remember to include coaches on your anti-bullying team. There's been some national news about coaches that are bullying, the intimidation. That is, in fact, bullying. It doesn't mean just to have them on this collaboration for bullying, but knowing that coaches and extracurricular advisors are the ones that are most often with the students when no one's around, just them. And I'm not saying that every coach will bully, but I'm saying just they might not be aware of it. He or she might not be aware of it. And letting them know that, it's great to win sportsmanship and things of that nature. Sometimes we might say something we think is motivational and might offend. Let your team know immediately. If you're hearing anything, or guys, ladies, if something happens, come to me. I'm trying to motivate. I think that would help out. And last but not least, something I thought of when we shared as a team, if you have parents, grandparents, chaperones, and volunteers, and they're out on a school activity, this is outside the school grounds, but still a school activity. If they see bullying and they're not trained through professional development, I would make some sort of I don't want to say waiver, but some sort of we have a bullying policy. Are you aware of it, Grandma Smith? Yes, I am. If you see it on a field trip, if you're coming in, you see it, report it to a teacher. I think I'd rather have the teacher say, well, that's not where I'll handle it, than it goes by and Mrs. Smith or Grandma Smith saw it and never said anything. So you got to take all of your volunteers, anyone that's walking in your building or representing the school on an outside activity should also be aware of what your policy is and ask rather than, I don't know if it's important. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. I just want to say, first of all, I'm so excited and grateful to be here because about maybe almost 35 years ago, I wanted to be where you guys were. I went to Lowell State Teachers College, and there were no English teaching jobs when I got out. So my advisor said to me, why don't you go to law school? And I went, ooh, lawyers, they wear suits and carry briefcases. I don't want to do that. But 35 years later, I'm actually blessed because I get to do what I love, and it's teaching, but also working with children as well, because I also, when I did begin to practice, started practicing in the juvenile courts. So let me ask you, just by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with some of the processes in the juvenile court? Okay. Oh, good, good. So what I've put on the board is just at the very beginning of the blackboard is just the definition of bullying, and it's in 37L, as Paula Colby mentioned, and you may have the statute in front of you. If you don't, we'll be glad to provide you with the statute later on or at some point. But notice that I wrote 3 semi-controversial bullet points at the beginning, and those are the only 3 points I want to make right now. Number 1, bullying is not a crime. When the legislature enacted the anti-bullying statute last May, it did not make bullying per se a crime. Most of our crimes and punishments are included in Chapter 265. So there's no separate, crime of bullying. However, if you look at the bullying definitions, the bullying behaviors are actually, it can become discipline issues for you guys, right? As well as CHINs, and I'll talk about that in a moment. CHINs cases, delinquency cases, and worst case scenario, youthful offender cases. For example, physical or emotional harm to the victim or victim's property. What kind of crime is that? Anybody? If the child was going to be charged with delinquency by reason of, right? Because a child between 7 and 17, it becomes a jurisdiction of the juvenile court, right? Yes? Yes. All right. So, and you're charged not with the crime, but you're charged with delinquency by reason of having violated a particular crime in Massachusetts. So, physical and emotional harm, putting the victim in fear, hostile school environment, infringing on victims' rights, material and substantial disruption. All of those can lead to either the school filing what's called a CHINS, a Child in Need of Services petition, which are not crimes, all right, but are acts that juveniles, children do, right, that either the school system or parents are seeking sort of the help and the assistance of the juvenile court to give them some services. So if a child, for example, is a school offender, right, the school can bring a petition in juvenile court saying the child is violating some of the reasonable rules and regulations of the school, right? And worst case scenario for that child is placement or custody in what used to be DSS, is now the Department of Children and Families. So school offender. The second is the school can also file a CHINS petition if the child is truant at school. So why is the child truant? Again, it could have something to do with bullying behavior at school on the part of either the victim or the bully and so forth. So that concerns you guys. The other piece of the CHINS cases is a parent can bring a CHINS case for a child that's violating the reasonable rules, you know, of the home. Actually, my law partner just received a new case where the parent filed a CHINS case because her child is uncontrollable, et cetera. The child has been allegedly bullied at school. Now, that's number 3. Number 4, the child can also be a runaway. Okay. So those are the 4 kinds of cases where either the school or the parent can bring a CHINS case. Now, getting to the crimes piece of it, and that's very important for you because it's included both in the statute and the plan as well, where ultimately the school, because you're the first step, right? The school can effectuate a process whereby the child can be charged with delinquency, first of all. Again, child 7 to 17, charged with delinquency by reason of some crime. And the crime could be the sort of least case scenario, disturbing school assembly. How many of you are familiar with that one? That's actually not in 265, it's 272, I have it down somewhere. And there are lots of disturbing school assembly cases and the delinquency cases, and usually if the child has no record, you know, they're dealt with, you know, not as seriously. But they can run the gamut from that to assault and battery dangerous weapon, stalking, criminal harassment, and at about the same time that the legislature enacted the bullying statute, also enacted 258E. Anybody know what that is? It's the juvenile court now also has a new kind of case, the anti-harassment order. So someone in the juvenile court can seek protection for a child. Akin, very similar to the old restraining order cases that were only for, you know, husband-wife, dating relationships, et cetera. So now 258E expands. And so you might have situations where a child would be seeking, or someone for the child, 258E order in the juvenile court. And worst case scenario are the youthful offender cases. And, you know, Paula mentioned Phoebe Prince, and I'm sure most of you know that the children who had harassed and bullied her in that case had been charged initially with delinquency, and then later on were indicted as youthful offenders. Now, that's not adult court, and some people think it is, because when the legislature enacted the youthful offender statute back in 2006, it eliminated the old transfer proceedings. So what that means is everything except murder cases still occur in the juvenile court. However, the juvenile court judge at the conclusion of the trial and at the sentencing hearing can actually give an adult punishment. So there's some pretty serious offenses charged against these kids, one of which is civil rights violations. So you want to keep all of those considerations in mind as you're drafting your plans. Yeah, you said it. I'm going to be the one that's running out of time real quickly. That was only my first point. Bullying is not a crime. All bullies are victims. All bullies are victims. I remember way back, and Dean and Gordon were in my juvenile class, that we love to give hypotheticals. Well, hypotheticals have become true. And one of the cases that they worked on was a child who was gay who actually moved here from another state and was in this new school system, and from day one started to be harassed. He's in gym class, and the kids say to him, what are you doing in the boys' gym class? You should be in the girls' gym class. But he responded very aggressively. He hit the other child with a baseball bat. Yeah, broke his nose. So that child was a victim. That became also a bully. So you'll be dealing, I'm sure, and you may have already dealt with issues like that. Even the most horrendous cases of a child who bullies. Well, why is that child bullied? And that gets to my third point about this, just like child abuse. If we only concentrate on the victim and not the bully, we're not going to stop it. We're not going to stop it. And it's on all of us, parents, schools, police, the courts, to try to see if we can get behind it and do something about it to stop the cycle. I'm done. Okay? Thank you.
So I want to go back. Just one thing that I didn't mention, and since she said civil rights violations, I just wanted to point out, and you'll see this in my slides, is that under the Mass Tort Claims Act, there is immunity for employees for their good faith conduct pertaining to reporting, investigation, and response to incidents occur in the schools. But when we talk about civil rights violations that implicate, Title VI, Title IX, Title II, Section 504, which are all based on discrimination based on national origin, sexual harassment, gender-based, disability, they can pierce that limitation on liability, they being a plaintiff. And so the plans are immensely important in terms of how you're going to respond, because you can find yourself facing a district facing a lawsuit where you're not shielded by that $100,000 immunity. The civil rights thing pulls in sort of an unlimited cap, and so it's immensely important. So I only wanted to say that.
That's great. At this point, we're going to take a bit of a break. And before we do so, there's two things. One, I mentioned to some of you that already came in, important restrooms, as you go out the door and go straight, there'll actually be, I know my mic's not on, but we don't need to. Pardon? You tell them where the bathroom is? I don't.
That microphone is on. And you know what would be helpful, just quickly, if you have an idea of what school districts are represented, your name, and with, just so we have an idea?
Sure. My name's Adam Federico. I'm the assistant principal at Linfield Middle School. We had Hudson and Marblehead and Rockport in our groups. Basically, the theme for everything we talked about was the district-wide level versus individual schools, or middle, high, and elementary, and even pre-K. And how do you create a plan and a policy that really makes sense for the unique needs of all those levels. We talked about the public comment aspect of this, and different districts did different things. Hudson had a real comprehensive group that looked at their plan. Other districts used school councils. The curriculum piece, everyone's very concerned about that. How do we fit this curriculum into the already full years? We had some districts are using their counselors to do some direct teaching, bringing in outside groups, using health teachers, things like that. The whole notion of evidence-based, and how do you meet that, and where's the no-cost option from the state that they said they would give us? We talked a lot about the time frame and how difficult it's been to put together such an important thing in such a small amount of time. The reporting form, do you have one for the whole district? Do you have one for different schools? And again, how do you manage that? The staff training piece that it talks about custodians, CAF workers, coaches, and then finally parent involvement. We talked about that you always get the parents you don't need at parent trainings. And do you tie it into mandatory events like athletics or proms or things like that, or do you kind of go the more traditional route using your PTOs and volunteers? So that was what we discussed, but the whole theme was, again, district-wide versus individual levels, and how do you manage that?
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Group 5?
Hello. Well, I think you were eavesdropping on our thing. Undoubtedly, we talked about some of the same things, but we were represented with Sharon School District, Westminster, Ashburnham, Andover, Rockport, and North Middlesex Regional School District. I think the theme of our conversation was clarity. In our group, we had central office administrators, building administrators, teachers, guidance counselors. So we, from different levels, looked at what we wanted the most was clarity. So we want clarity from the Department of Education, that no funding, the no funded mandate piece, the piece about our curricula. Can it be homegrown, or must it be canned and evidence-based and research-based? There's some discrepancies in some of the messages we've been given. At the school level of the principal, we're looking at how do we help teachers understand truly what their role is. And then at the teacher level, where the rubber meets the road, where they're going to be dealing with the most issues from this law, how do we give them good direction and clarity, but still give them some ability to manage their classrooms the way they do? There is an individual aspect of that. Each teacher has classroom management that fits their style. So we don't want to cram them in, but we also want them to be able to follow the law. The other piece is the costs of all the work. We said if we put $1 of value on our time, what has this cost our districts? It's important. You know, we've been dealing with bullying since 2 kids got together. So I think that it's not a new thing for us, but the mandates are extremely restrictive in some respects, unclear in other respects, so we're still scratching our heads.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Group 4?
Mary Devlin from Marblehead. We had Groton, Marblehead, Andover, Sharon represented. We also had an outreach program that went across multiple towns and an after-school program ages 5 through 13. I'm going to piggyback on the last presenter because clarity and communication appeared to be the theme that was coming out throughout the conversation. In terms of how the districts are addressing the plans, it's all over the place. Several districts are dealing with it very comprehensively and centralizing it with committees up to 50 people and doing some very in-depth discussion with subgroups such as students. Other groups are working on a school level and trying to struggle with, do you have individual plans, what's in an individual plan, what's in a whole plan. So there's different levels of leadership that is occurring. Within that discussion, there was importance in terms of definition of terms, definition of the process, looking at the draft plan that came out from the state, and really addressing every one of those components. Some districts have done some of those components very nicely, where one district has Dr. Englander having done some very extensive training starting really early on in September. Other districts are looking at that training and trying to meet that December deadline and getting the training in. There was sort of a hope there would be a spot to do some sharing of different plans, even if the plans are in process, to look at what other districts are doing. One of the superintendents mentioned that at the superintendent's meeting, they're using the Google, I think, Doc in order to do sort of an ongoing discussion through the website that certainly that district has found very helpful. Andover mentioned that their document is on their website and open for anybody to look at if there's an interest. In terms of reporting for districts, for some districts, this has developed some confusion on what you report and what you don't report. One attorney in one district has really tried to work with the administrators on looking at what do you define and not define as bullying versus an infraction against the code of conduct, and trying to shake that out with the staff so they give some structure for how they move forward. There's been a tremendous amount of demands that have been placed on building level administrators, especially in districts that are tending to get a lot of reporting, and they're trying to struggle with doing the regular job plus dealing with what the demands are. And there's sort of a hypervigilance on people who are reporters in some of the districts and almost over-reporting. In terms of professional development, all over the place, okay, with using some people having started right in September, as I mentioned, other people ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brad Monroe from Blackstone Millville Regional School District, and some of our other members were from Marblehead, Sharon, and the Greater Lawrence Collaborative. We had a lot of different topics, and we raised a lot of questions, and then we had some anecdotal sort of answers to some of those. The first thing we did was talk about where we all are in the plan development, and with an eye on December 31st. One of our members was from a collaborative, and he was having a problem with working with many plans in many districts and trying to have a collaborative solution to this with so many districts that he works with. If some are more strict or less strict, or how to come to some consensus. Next, we talked about how to train the support staff, and there's a young lady right here that if anybody has a way to train support staff without having time for them to do it in their contract, they don't come in any other days than the school days, they should tell her how to do that, because training them is a part of the game here, and some of us have a vehicle to do that, and some of us don't. A couple of ideas we had for that was to have an online training session with a sign-off sheet at the end, which a lot of us do for civil rights and other things like that, or the Google Apps common file sharing if they're all in that same game. We discussed to what level of specificity we needed for the grade-by-grade curriculum piece. Is it too general? Is it, grades K to 5 can do this, or is it grade by grade and specifically dates, times, curriculum pieces, and things like that? We discussed the difference between the plan and the policy. Sometimes we like to write plans and procedures to beat the band, but we don't want to go into the policy realm too much. And that the MASC has some sample plans, I think, that school committees maybe should be looking at as far as how to not reinvent the wheel. We had a very interesting conversation about the anonymous bullying reporting procedures, self-reporting, how to do that, how that can happen. Some of the special ed software and some of the SIS software, I guess, are coming up with clickable links that go right to probably the tech director or somebody else in the school district. We had a good discussion about behavior on buses and the responsibility of training bus drivers and the responsibility of bus drivers to report crimes and how they do that and what form they use. And we also talked about the discipline form, should it be the same for K to 12, and how not to saddle vice principals with a misconduct form for all the other crimes and a special one just for this, and does it have to be both? And how not to reinvent the wheel and tell them what to do.
Great. Thank you.
Please.
All right, Gordon, you're up.
My name is Gordon Gainty. I'm representing Group 2. I'm a proud graduate of the Massachusetts School of Law. Tuesday of next week, I'll be an attorney. Practicing in the juvenile court system. Our group, the only two communities that I made note of, I did not know that there would be math in this equation, was Rockport and Marblehead. If I'm leaving out some, I apologize. We have 6 topics. The first one is, if you could please describe the sequence of events regarding a Chins petition.
Oh, do you want me to do that now? Oh,
You
wait.
can do that whenever you'd like. This is just what we
Okay,
came up
okay.
with. The topic that came up, which triggered this as an issue, was one gentleman said that Chin's petitions seem to be ineffective for truancy causes of action. And I'm sorry, I'm giving all this legal parlance, but I think you can understand it.
So anxious
Most
to just
Chins
want in.
petitions are ineffective. That's my opinion.
Child
It's
in need of
called statute
services,
with no
in
teeth,
plain English.
but-
Under which circumstances are we actually mandated to report was a huge topic. Do we do it under here? Do we do it under there? Of course, the intelligent people in our group do have common sense and can discern between serious and non-serious, but they want to conform with the law and they don't quite understand what's required. Number 3, specific examples of what is regarded to be a violation of one's civil rights as would trigger the piercing of the Mass Tort Claims Act such that it would expose the district to some serious financial penalty. I think that's big from a legal point of view. Number 4, how to handle consistency between school districts in their policies, their anti-bullying policies. For example, several in our group said, well, what if a student from Rockport moves to Marblehead? Are we is it part of our responsibility to retrain them to the school district of which they're being moved to? Number 5, can you define for our group, please, what constitutes a second or third offense as would trigger a teacher's duty to report harassment? Apparently, there are some policies that would regard a second or third offense, but the example used is, okay, we have a student who in 4th grade has a note on their record that they said something of a bullying nature. Now this same student is now in the 8th or 9th grade. Does that constitute a second offense? By the way, related to that, do records from elementary school transfer to middle school to high school? And lastly, how do we deal with students who transfer in from other cultures? By example, where in different parts of our country certain language is considered absolutely acceptable or tolerated, are we charged with the responsibilities of retraining those students to our culture? Thank you.
And Group 1, good morning. I'm Nancy Houle. I'm the Supervisor of Pupil Personnel Services for the Wachusett Regional School District. And in Group 1, we had representatives from Girls, Inc., Marblehead, Quabog, Somerville, Cambridge, and Billerica. In addition to the points previously brought forth, we talked about, again, range of consequences, the need to be flexible case by case, but still maintain consistency. The abuse of legal language by parents to their advantage was a little topic that we talked about, where you get some savvy parents that come in with the law and the language and twisting it to suit their particular point. Another challenge would be addressing behavioral plans, also assuring parents that we as school administrators and school staff are responsive, compassionate, and aware and will keep their children safe. Also talked about when outside things become inside things, when to report to law enforcement. And then we had a question that we'd like the panel to address, the role of mediation and then the liability therein if used as a point of resolving some issues in a school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When you ask about the role of mediation, are you asking that as a selection of venue on behalf of the district if a complaint is filed, or are you asking something else?
I'm using it as part of an informal resolution.
Okay, okay. Paula, you want to?
We were just
chairs?
wondering if, are we doing a break, or are you guys
You
okay?
guys need a break?
Um,
I'll take like a 5 or 10 minute break.
10? Take 10?
Unless you
10-minute
had time to walk around and,
Okay,
okay.
10-minute
10.
break,
All right,
and then
okay.
we'll come back and we'll start
Okay.
addressing some of the questions. And we're going to do the knee ask thing after too.
The NEASC thing.
The knee ask thing.
Yes.
Thing.
So formal.
Okay.
I'm just going to address the Chin's question first. Oops. Since that's near and dear to my whatever. I don't know how many years ago it was. I think it was shortly after I began practicing. It was when the legislature decriminalized, certain behavior of children. They were always lumped all together, and acts like, being a school offender, or truancy, running away, etc. They were wayward children, reform schools and all of that. So when the Chin statute was enacted, the purpose of the statute was, let's decriminalize. It was a prophylactic measure. Let's see what we can do to help kids so that they don't end up engaging in criminal behavior where they'd have delinquency complaints and even more serious kinds of procedures instituted against them. So that was and still is the purpose of Chin's case. When I went over it real quickly before, let me just say that while it's not a criminal statute, the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, everybody knows that, right? A burden of proof for a criminal case, that's the burden of proof for a Chin's case as well. The interesting thing about it is, I mentioned before, it was 4 kinds of behaviors that are basically brought by either the school or the parent, right? The school offender case, the truancy on the part of the school, parent running away and not behaving at home. Well, once a Chin's case gets filed and a Chin's petition issues, immediately counsel for child is appointed, because the child's sort of, liberty is at risk in terms of the child can be ultimately removed from the custody of his or her parents. So the child gets counsel. And those of you that have been involved in Chin's cases, and I'm sure some of you have, it's kind of odd because usually a petitioner or whoever brings a case first has like an attorney, to prosecute the case and so forth. Doesn't happen on the part of the school and also on the part of the parent. So they're kind of weird cases to begin with. But again, the purpose is still, let's see what we can do with this child that's, misbehaving at home, misbehaving at school, what are the reasons for it? And sometimes they overlap with some of the other cases. And, so a child might be running away or not obeying at home, not obeying at school, because that child is actually being abused and neglected at home. So someone who's a mandated reporter, files a 51A, and ultimately it actually becomes a care and protection case, which is much more serious and, involves a parent or caretaker abusing or neglecting the child. But getting back to the Chins, actually a couple of years ago, the Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in Massachusetts, held that in the context of a Chins case, if there's the possibility, and again, this is worst case scenario with just the Chins, it's just, it's a civil case, so it's Department of Children and Families custody. It's never going to be DYS, if it's just the Chins. But if there's a possibility that a child would actually be, removed from the home and placed in DCF custody, now parent gets counsel too. So Chins is beginning to be sort of more formal. Hopefully, in the context of, the bullying statute, I know you've all looked at it, you've looked at the plans. Both the statute and the sample plan says that you've got to provide, counseling, services, et cetera. The school has to, right, within the context, not only for the victim, but for the aggressor as well. Actually, I have a question for all of you. What kind of counseling have you talked about, or is it even possible within your budgets, the counseling that you'll be providing pursuant to the plans? Anybody? Yeah.
We have an adjustment counselor in school, although there's only one for 1,000 students, so that would be our.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah, that would be it.
and that's typical. So just like the juvenile court system, which pursuant to the statute says, CHIN's child in need of services, so we're going to do our best to give services. And the services don't happen, there aren't enough, there's no money, etc. So that's what I have to say about the CHIN's process. Any questions about that? Oh, let me also just say that, when the juvenile court was first created back in, 1899 or so, the purpose of the court, and it still is, even with the most serious, like those kids out of South Hadley indicted as youthful offenders, they're still in the juvenile court. The purpose is still, let's see if we can rehabilitate, let's see if we can protect, et cetera, and not punish. So even the judges in the most serious youthful offender cases have the option of some sort of, a sentence that's not an adult sentence. Let's see if we can help. Let's see if we can afford services again so this person can ultimately become, a responsible adult, et cetera. Did I say somebody's hand up? Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Process where you have steps before you file a CHINS. CHINS isn't going to cure a kid from missing school or misbehaving. But the one thing I think it does do, it gets the attention of the parent who has control of the student.
Mm-hmm.
It also can get the attention of the student. I've seen marked improvement in behavior, maybe not in the long term at times, certainly in attendance I think it impacts, but behavior, but it does keep the parent on notice, and it's a step into a care and protection petition in many cases. The other piece that's important is it involves the probation officer on a regular basis. Our probation officer
That's right.
goes to the schools on a regular basis and always visits his CHIN kids. So I know a lot of people have strong feelings that it's not a good tool. I think it depends on how you use it, what your expectations are, and again, it's I find it to be effective.
And I'm glad you said probation officers. It depends on the who's in the court system too, and the every court is different in terms of the employees and the services offered. You have a good probation officer, a good a judge who's really interested and committed. And yes, I totally agree with you.
And so that kind of leads to there was a question about when is it a second offense, when is it a third offense. And so we're not 100% sure. I asked Gordon for clarification on why that question was asked. But if it's with respect to violations of district policies, you are within your purview to sort of give some clarity to that and define it. So the question really, as it was presented hypothetically, was, you had a kid that does something in the 4th grade and then has a clean record in the 8th grade, harasses somebody again. The 8th grade teacher's worried that, well, I'm in the middle school, the disciplinary record didn't transfer. Is that a second offense? Am I duty bound? That is not something that the law necessarily addresses, that you would address within your policies. So that's that piece of it. If it was asked with respect to the law in the 258E Section 1, which Paula mentioned, I think, very briefly, which is the anti-harassment statute, which talks about 3 offenses. The statute, once again, doesn't define it, but case law looks at it on a case-by-case basis. So even if you string together the case law, it doesn't say, well, 3 incidents over a 3-year span is 3 incidents, because it's not that specific. So they look at the behavior. Paula would be quick to clarify that it has to be per individual. So the likelihood is, in that scenario, if you had someone if I was harassing Gordon in the 4th grade, in the 8th grade, it's likely not Gordon again. It might be Jeff.
Somebody
so
else
that doesn't
by that
count.
time.
So that's not 2, because it's not 2 to me. It's that individual being harassed 3 times. It's likely, by my reading of the case law, that you're looking at a fairly finite period of time within the school year, or even within portions of the school year. So if that was the question, that's how that piece works. Did you want to add to that?
No.
No. Okay.
But there's a question about it, I think. Let's see if we can.
about bullying policies, if something happens more than once, that is only twice.
Right, the repeated use.
But when we look at case law, and so
right.
we hear from assistant district attorneys, they are interpreting the word repeated as in case law to mean 3.
Yes.
So, so we're talking about the bullying that would move from school type of being addressed and offense to something that we're bringing in the school resource officer, and we're talking about starting to report criminal. But I think that's really important because having been to different presentations on bullying, we as administrators, it gets a little confusing being told 3 times versus 2 times. So that it depends on the level.
Yep.
And so when you're talking about something that would go to, to the police, we're talking 3, or at least when it would get to the level of court. But for all of us to think about, if it happens more than once, it is falling into bullying, right?
I agree with you if it happens more than once.
Yep, exactly. In fact, we actually did a hypothetical with our students about this. And we had the situations range from the kid breaking the nose to the kid just violating what he was told to do in detention by not writing an essay that seemed somewhat threatening. And
right.
We examined all of the case law, and it would suggest that you could at least make a strong argument, is the best we can say, that a couple times could be defined as repeated. But again, some of this is looking at how clearly you've defined them within your own policies, and I think that's the good news, is if you can define it and really have your teachers enforcing it, that carries a lot of weight when the courts come in and examine what policies were broken and what happened. So it's not quite as scary as a court just comes in and says, oh my God, well, you missed this, they did this or that, if that makes sense. Someone asked about the civil rights, examples of civil rights violations. I don't know if that I could come up with a whole bunch of hypotheticals for you. This slide.
Well, one is actually here, the Phoebe Prince case itself.
Right. I just wanted to, before I did that, but this slide, which is slide 4 in your packet, gives you at the bottom here the specific sections, titles that govern what fall under the rubric, if you will, of civil rights. And so the things that will touch, again, I think I mentioned in my presentation, race, color, national origin, sexual harassment, gender-based, disability, sexual orientation are going to fall under civil rights violations. And the Phoebe Prince one, you want to talk about that, is a good example.
Actually, I was reminded of something else. How many of you received it's called the Dear Colleague letter from the Office for Civil Rights? Doesn't sound familiar? Just it was dated actually October 26. There's a way that we have your email addresses. I'm assuming we're going to be doing something with them, Dean, where we can send this out. This is very, very important because it actually details examples, and one of the examples has to do with the sexual orientation cases as well. We'll send this to you. Anything else? You want to talk about NEAS because we're going to run out of time. I already saw one person leave.
Everyone have questions? If not, thank you. Without it, so, wow, tone it down. The NEAS piece, how this came about, as I mentioned, I was a co-chair in a school in Connecticut twice and did several visits. And I thought if curriculum is K through 12 in a school system, then you're going to be required to somehow have an assessment for that. So when I called NEAS, and I'm actually going to read word for word because I don't want to misquote, and this is in your sheets. I think it was October 7th, I actually called NEAS and I had a question for them as I'm preparing a paper as well on the anti-bullying. And I said, what about the NEAS piece? How is the curriculum going to be infused? How are you going to be assessed on that? And I got a because the 2011 standards on their website are now out. So schools that are going to be getting visits for the 2011 year are going to have their standards set, yet the K-12 piece isn't. So I want to read word for word because hopefully this will help a little bit. When I talked to George Edwards at NEASC, I asked him the question, how are you going to assess this? And I quote, because I played it several times, I made him leave the message. Schools developing student expectations regarding the bullying law fits perfectly into NEASC definition of social and civic expectations. In general, the visiting teams, I think he was mentioning, would expect expectations, quote, designed to meet social and civic expectations. So then I said, okay. Expectations are the responsibility of the school and community to identify in line with school community wishes with students, end quote. What does that mean? Well, if you take a look at the standards, I always go by it was the number one, the mission statement, and now it's core values, beliefs, and learning expectations. So if I may, I'm going to jump to an example. I always believe that the mission statement, when I went on a visiting team or had them come to me, the mission statement is what drives the school. And not to mention, if I'm knocking anyone, XYZ school is a learning community, and this is a makeup. Adding the word safe, or a safe and tolerant, or whatever, now then says, K-12, if this is driving the school, just the word safe. And I know this will take 4 months of committee with your teachers to include safe. Doesn't have art, doesn't have math, yeah, it's safe, it can work. And I asked George, and he said that would work. That would be specific enough to say, if you are going to include that, there are schools in Western Mass. I'm from West Springfield, Massachusetts originally. The students that we talked about today, Carl Walker Hoover and Phoebe Prince, I went online. Those schools have made great strides in their bullying programs. Neither one of them has changed their mission statement to include a safe or tolerant environment. Wow. All that work to do what you're here today to go back and bring to your districts. And a simple word is safe to let people know this is what's driving our school is a safe and or tolerant environment, I think is huge. The other part of that is the social expectations. And I put one there for you that says, develop the skills necessary for success in a post-secondary career. A lot of schools have that. It's like the number one I've seen. I added, recognize and appreciate all individual differences in a tolerant and safe environment. Well, how would you possibly assess that for NEASC? Well, simply, if we had 12 incidences of bullying, our goal is to get it down to 8. We've reported this amount, we've investigated, this is where we are. NEASC is looking like I think the DESE plan. It's a work in progress. I think I spoke to one gentleman, he said, how can you do all this? I would make it like a tier system in my plan, that if professional development has already been set by the time you got your model plans on August 31st, and professional development's already been set, I would have a tier system where from January 2011 to May, we're working on professional development, which will address. It's a work in progress. If you're going by the NEASC standard in some of the high school, I think there's also elementary and middle school, the NEASC standard is wonderful because if you're looking at presenting this plan as a superintendent administrator, you have that attestation page at the end that the chair does it, the instruction chair, the principal, everybody next to God signs that, okay? Do that on your DESE plan. Have student representatives. If you've got a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior class president, get them in. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're talking about. You're part of a collaboration. Let's talk about it. Cite it off. When that goes in, now I can say, hey, I've met the collaboration piece. Administrator signed it. My teacher, my bullying task force signed it. A lot of what NEASC does, I think, will really help you in addressing this DESE model prevention plan. I really do. With that, the no bully zone and things like that, I just added that. That wouldn't actually, or maybe on a particular mission statement. But the point is made that the student expectation, how do I say that we're going to develop skills necessary for success in a post-secondary career? How do you assess that? Well, we have X amount of kids going to college. In terms of the tolerant, safe environment, when they walk into that room and they see a classroom constitution, they see anti-bullying signs up, these are the kinds of things that create the culture, and I think that's enough to say to NEASC and or for this plan, we're making this a culture, we're working towards this never-ending improvement plan. I hope that's somewhat clear. I know I'm stressed for time, so I've got to flip. And again, I can get this bigger and send it to you. You actually have the PowerPoint piece. What I attempted to do, and again, I'll send this so you get a full-size piece, I took when I looked at the mass bullying law, and that's kind of in green, and the NEASC standards are in blue. And when I called NEASC and I'm telling him, he's like, well, what do you got? What'd you come up with? And I'm working on it, was my answer. But if you take a look at what the law is actually addressing and what NEASC asks, they mesh so well together. It's almost as if you've gone through the NEASC accreditation process. The prevention plan really, I think, becomes a little bit easier, and I'll make a point. The mission and expectation standard indicator, which is first for NEASC, says the mission statement of the school's expectations for student learning guide the procedures and policy of the school. If you look at the law, assessing the needs and resources, the plan should be, oh, I'm sorry, hold on, get the pen. Okay, thank you. The school's district's blueprint for enhancing capacity to prevent and respond to issues of bullying. They mesh. So if you add just that simple word of safe, I'm not saying that's the end all. I'm not saying that's what NEASC is looking for, not maybe what DESE is looking for. But doesn't it kind of make sense if your mission is driving the school or the district that maybe safe and tolerant would be there? I think that equates to the next piece. The plan must be developed in consultation with teachers. That's the DESE's recommendation that this is a collaboration. And then, behold, curriculum standard. The professional staff shall be actively involved in ongoing development in curriculum based on assessments of student performance. Someone, I think, mentioned, and I hope I got it right, someone said, well, how do you do the curriculum? I think one of the, was it group 4 or someone, I thought, asked about the curriculum piece. Couple did, about the curriculum. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but if I was on a NEAS team and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel and I was presenting it for the DESE plan or a NEAS, I'd say, well, let's take a look at the English department, language arts department. We do To Kill a Mockingbird. If Tom Robinson was in your high school, was he bullied? And have them write an essay. I mean, what I'm trying to say is there are things that are already there. Don't go out of your way to try and reinvent this to get the plan in by December 31st and rush it. There are things that can be done that will embed in the curriculum without having to stretch curriculum as teachers are saying, I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. We have MCAS, I know. How do we do that? There are ways that are creative to do it that when I'm pulling the evidence file out and NEASC and I'm saying, wow, you tied To Kill a Mockingbird to that, or there might be a situation in a current events class. And I whip that out and I say, wow, they've done it. Those being shared with your staff, they're not going to be likely to say, gee, I don't have time for this. Well, you're already doing it. It's tweaking the summer question, taking a look at what the summer reading pieces are, senior projects, exit projects, things like that. That also could be. When the seniors leave and you get their exit projects, isn't that great that they're preparing the curriculum? I taught AP history. What do you do when the AP tests are done? I made the kids work on units so I could use those as teaching aids for the next year. Those are things that you can just jump right on board. Have your students prepare the type of work for you. Then your teachers aren't going, oh. And I'll tell you, they'll surprise you. They do great work. They really do. Last piece, school districts, charter schools, department approved, blah, blah, blah. We go through professional development that includes developmentally appropriate strategies. Language or verbiage particular to the grade level. Someone I think also asked that, how is the curriculum bed? If you have a summer reading for a 10th grade or a sophomore class, then it already is, or to some stretch, 10th grade level. If you tweak those, then you're not really reinventing the wheel. They're already prepared for you. And it's a double assessment for you. NEAS comes in. Are they really going to stress and look at the anti-bullying curriculum as much as they want to see your math curriculum? I don't know. They will look. You've killed two birds with one stone. Summer reading. Here's our bullying curriculum. It's also our language arts curriculum. Here's our social studies. Here's our NEAS. It covers both pieces. Professional development, I don't know how you could possibly have had that in place when you got your model plan on August 31st. What can we do ahead of time? Again, I think bang for the buck. And that means spread the wealth. See the top 3 things and break your staff into those groups. So you can share the wealth and they can be happy to double their PDPs for certification. Last but not least, an act relative to bullying. Again, the green. Hostile environment, we talked about that. And I think, Paula, you alluded to it's very ambiguous. What is a hostile environment? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the legal answer. I do know that if you define it up front, you have a better way to defend it. And I think we shared in a conversation. What is a hostile environment? The minute you walk into school or you're dropped off at school till the end of the day. So I can't say, well, they're out waiting at recess or before the school opened. If you define those kinds of things, a hostile environment or a school environment means from 7:40, 7 o'clock, whatever, until that's what happens in school. So if I hear it once, then you can react to that. The school culture piece of it and the leadership standard for NEAS, the school community consciously and continuously builds a safe, positive, respectful, and supportive culture that fosters student responsibility for learning. I think it would be great as a NEAS person, or if I was part of the DESE, to come in and say, students are starting to take over, you've empowered them to do these kinds of things. So the posters in the room, the state constitutions, the fact that students are doing some of the work as senior or student projects, those are the kinds of things that if they are some of the top shelf students, those can be utilized for, I hate to say it, teaching aids, teaching tools. I don't know if schools that you're working with do the AP. What do you do at the end of the year? That was the big question. I was an AP reader for a couple years, and that was the question. What do you do with your students at the end of the year? get them to work on items that'll help the students coming up the next year. So it's a way for me to say, this lends itself to not having to do all that much work. If you start the system now, your students are actually working for you. Last, each school district, charter school, approved private day or residential school, and collaborative shall provide age-appropriate instruction. Then you drop down to the NEAS piece. The school has challenging, measurable 21st learning measures and or assessments. If it's grade-specific, unfortunately, it's grade-specific. If there are contests per grade level, anti-bullying posters, there are things in which a student who might be found before the second or third repeated time for bullying, and you say, I want you to write a letter for forgiveness, or I want you to do something like, what would do? Journaling, 6 through 12. I want you to journal for the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever. And you're going to talk about, what was it like? What did you do? You got in trouble. Yeah. How did that make you feel? How do you think they felt? There's also a way to do like an open-ended question. May I say MCAS? There could be open response questions in which, I don't want to say it's a punishment, but it should be. I'm not going to just say, okay, you're done. Part of our process or part of our policy is if you are, you're going to have to write for 10 days. You're going to have to write a journal. What was it like? Did you see that student in the hallway? How did you feel? How do you think they felt? There are opportunities here for you to have the student, empower the student to do the work. I don't want to say that the law is bad. I think that it deputizes the whole school at this point, makes everyone a deputy, a marshal in investigating and doing that. If the onus is on the student to rehabilitate, we want to get those students that are the bullies, I would advocate that please try to do something where the student has some onus to say, okay, I did wrong. You talked about specifically the rehabilitation piece. I don't know if there's a problem with the DESE in their model plan to say, why not? Why can't you have like journaling, things like that for the student to work on? At this point, I would like to say I kind of tried to do it so you guys can get your certificates of attendance, which Barbara has on the way out. I would like to say thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. I know it was a little rushed towards the end for you, and I'm sorry. I will send you a full-size set of the PowerPoint instead of those little pieces. That's why I have it. I'll also send the component, the statute, and the colleague letter, and like a synopsis of those group pieces. Happy Thanksgiving. Have a rest of a good school year. I hope we helped. Thank you. Thanks, Dean. Thank you. There's an evaluation piece in your folder somewhere. You don't have to sign it, but it would be great if you, on your way out, take a few seconds. Just fill that out for us. It would help.
And hand that to Barb.
Yeah, and Barbara on the way out. Barb, raise your hand. Barb will have your certificates and take your evaluations. Thank you once again.